On this podcast, we've had numerous guests talk about business systems, why they're needed, why they're valuable, why you should have them, and you're sold. But what actually goes into a good business system? We've really never tackled that one before. But today we are, and we're going to get to the essential ingredients with a consultant who helps his clients develop them all the time. I'm Carl White, principal at Market Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. It's usually what they want, but I think care is better when it's the provider of care who owns the practice, because then any decision that's got to get made, business, clinical, whatever it might be, is made by the same people who have to turn right around and take care of a patient next. So we can feel quite confident that the needs of the patient are always top of mind. My guest today is Dr. John Ervin. John is a fellow of Systems Wisdom, a nurse executive, entrepreneur, legal nurse consultant, and retired U.S. Army officer with over 20 years leading complex healthcare organizations and growth stage ventures. He serves as adjunct faculty at Rowan College of South Jersey, teaching entrepreneurship. A former COO and senior leader, he's driven mergers, turnarounds, and value-based care initiatives. John is the founder and CEO of AllNet Coaching and Consulting, where he delivers medical distribution, consulting, and innovation solutions while advancing partnership standards and healthcare commercialization with global impact and reach. John, just from hearing that, you've got a lot going on. Thanks for carving some time out to come on Practice Care.
You're welcome. Thanks, Carl. I'm really excited about this conversation we're going to have. So thank you.
Yeah, me too. I love systems. People can get sort of, I don't know, geeked out on them or turned off by them one way or the other, but my goodness, do they solve a lot of problems when you have got some good ones. So I'm excited about this too. But first, I'm so repetitive at this point, 200 episodes in. Listeners know what I'm going to say. Tell us more about you. That was a short bio, but that's what I asked for. So fill in some gaps for us.
Absolutely. So I'm born and raised here in Southern New Jersey. Was raised in Gloucester City, New Jersey. And I basically spent about 10 years in the United States military. I started my career as a Army medic, and I was a surgical technologist. So I actually would scrub surgical cases. And then I received a scholarship to attend Villanova University School of Nursing through the Army and spent about 9 years in the United States Army. Had a great career. And since then, basically been doing healthcare executive leadership positions, medical device sales, and business development and consulting.
Excellent. So yes, quite the throughput of the merger of, I'll say, healthcare and the operations of healthcare. And so you've seen both sides. So good.
Yes, good point. Yeah.
Yeah,
So some of us on the healthcare side will say that the dark side for the medical sales side, but
yeah,
it's a systems, I would call it the systems approach and the systems view, which
yeah.
is extremely important in my
Yes.
career.
Yes, yes, yes. And we're going to get into the essential ingredients today, kind of a nuts and bolts discussion. And I just want to jump right into it. What are the core ingredients of a good business system?
So the core ingredients are looking at what I call a systems view approach of your business. So traditionally, over the last 50 years, since the Industrial Revolution, a lot of businesses, and this includes healthcare organizations, we've taken a more fragmented or a linear approach.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been reinforced also through educational institutions, through like MBA programs, where you learn marketing and you learn sales and you learn finance and you learn other disciplines, but we don't often do a blended approach. And I think that's the most important component of a business system. And each one of the individual, I call them nodes or units of the business,
Mm-hmm.
they're all interdependent. They're basically integrated. And when you take a systems view approach, and this is how I approach a lot of my consulting, is really understanding, I call it the seesaw effect. So, for example, in a healthcare organization, if we take away money or we decrease our budget, how will that affect our clinical outcomes and our patient satisfaction? So
Mm-hmm.
it absolutely has a direct effect, and that's the seesaw effect. So I carefully, work with businesses and organizations to help them understand and create awareness about these interdependent systems and how, approaching, their business from a systems perspective can be extremely valuable. And It's not always about optimizing, it's more about synthesizing and integrating. And then you continuously have to improve and redesign your business systems because they all interact together. And I think that's where a lot of businesses have struggled the last decade. And it's especially in the healthcare industry because we're kind of in a whole transformation right now of the industry. But that integrated systems view approach with each business component is critical.
So that's to me, that's a good sort of case to be made of to view your business as a, a set of systems. Um, but let pick any pick a system, pick one system, and what are the core ingredients of it so that it's, you know, you could take this process or this thing that's got to get done, which is today, you know, not working so well or frustrating, and transform it into a system that runs well. So give us like just almost like, tool time nuts and bolts. What makes a good system? Whether it's covering something large or even something as simple as, I don't know, closing the books every day. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you a good example of a medical group, physician practice I worked with a couple years ago.
Mhm.
And it started where I basically was hired as a consultant. I ended up being the COO, but the system that they had in place was fragmented, and there was lack of communication, and there were silos within the organization, which we
Mhm.
typically see. But the system we created, we redesigned, was basically taking marketing, human resources, supply chain, the vendors, the facilities, and this was a medical group, the clinical services and products,
Mhm.
and integrated all of them together. And the most important thing is when you're looking at your operating system, which is what I typically, the term I use is understanding that it's a complete operating system, your business. And you have to take time to actually evaluate each one of those systems. And that's what we did for this medical group practice, taking time to basically review each component of like the sales processes and our vendors. Was it working? Was it not working? And if
So
it
let's
wasn't
pick so let's
working,
pick that one. Let's say the
sure,
sales
yeah,
process.
sure.
What are the ingredients in this case? What were the ingredients to turn that sales process into a good system?
So for us, it was a private medical group, and we had to look at our internal uh, customer base, which is our patients,
Hmm.
and then look at what we call physician referrals
Hmm.
and how our word of mouth in marketing or sales was working and not working, and then make sure we're constantly nurturing those patients or those family members to make sure that they're receiving satisfied service and that they're coming back and referring us. And a lot of medical practices are based on word of mouth or referrals from other physicians. The other piece of that was reaching out to our referring physicians in the community and having conversations with them and keeping in touch with them, again nurturing that relationship with our referring physician, which was very critical.
So was that not happening before?
Correct, it wasn't. And that's very common in medical practices. They've have great relationships in the community. A lot of them, if they're private, they've been there for many years, but they often forget about the nurturing aspect and continually communicating and updating their current patients and the local community, and most importantly is their referring physicians. And that's something that doesn't take a lot of expertise. It just takes a little bit of effort.
Okay. So was let's continue with that system. So you built this new system to for outreach, nurturing both patients and referral sources. Okay. When you built that system, what were the what were the qualities of it so that you could look at it, you and everybody in the practice can look at it and go, this is now a good system.
So the
How did you
first
know?
thing
How
we
did you
did
know it was good?
Yep. So the first thing we did is what I call a strategic review, right? So we looked at our communication piece. And a great example is we looked at our phone system, and our vendor,
Hmm.
literally the telecommunication system within the medical group. And we realized after reviewing it, it wasn't working. So we actually did some bids for three different telecommunications companies, and we brought in a partner company, and we started working with them. And
Mhm.
that was really important because that was the foundation of communications with our patients, with our referring physicians. And the reason we did that is we realized that we had what we call abandonment, where patients were calling in or physician practices were calling in and nobody was answering the phone. So that was really the foundation. And then once you get that in place, then you build out the other pieces of the system, communication, and then going out and, having that personal touch with our patients. And
So,
of course, visiting our referring physicians' offices and, sharing our information and our services and updating them on the different services we're providing in the community.
okay. And so you set this up. So now that was all happening. Um, was it tracked? Was progress tracked? Were results tracked? Like what, how did you know that? Because a practice could do everything you just said,
Absolutely.
but do it poorly. So how did you guys know it was good?
So a couple ways. One is doing surveys, getting customer feedback,
Okay.
literally interviewing our patients.
Hmm.
And this was like the tail end of the pandemic. So everybody was used to this, remote relationship with patients, which is not going to it's not going to sustain us long term. So again, talking to the voice of the customer, the patients, our referring physicians, and with the telecom system that we brought in, we could track the calls, the abandonment. We could record like the amount of calls that we took, the communications that occurred through the telecom system was very important. And then
Hmm.
for our business was our patient volumes. You know, was it having an impact on increasing the number of patients that come into our practice? And in this case, it did. And ultimately, it also led to increased surgical volumes as well, because we had a surgical center in the building. And
Okay.
that's how we reinforced that what we were doing was working.
Okay. So you track stuff. Were there any other elements of the system that you looked at it and you go, all right, now this is good.
I think the one I think big lesson learned was to look internally organically, because this was a practice, and this is very common, that had thousands and thousands of patients, right,
Hmm.
over the years. They were in business for 40 years,
Hmm.
but they never reached back out to patients that maybe were technically inactive. Maybe they haven't come to the practice in years.
Hmm.
And then to get that patient list and send them an email or send them uh, a card in the mail and just say, hey, just checking in. We're still here. If you need anything, let us know. These are the services we have. So, for
Hmm.
example, we were doing COVID testing at this practice. It was a very, very successful COVID testing site for the
Okay.
whole community.
Hmm.
So that was something I think that was, a really great takeaway for us. And again, just not always having to go out and rely on social media and more traditional marketing practices or processes, which can be costly,
Hmm.
reaching organically into our existing network of patients, and that's
Hmm.
was very effective.
Right. Okay. Were there any other elements about it that you look at it, or maybe like, a different system where you look at it and go, all right, this is how we know. Because the reason I'm asking is because
Yeah,
for the listeners who are, listening to this and saying, well, we don't have this, but we need, I'm John's convincing me. Um,
yeah,
you need some idea of how do we know when what we've built, something we've never built before, is good.
yes.
So any
So
other, I just want to keep probing on this.
yeah, no, I think it's a great question. Again, I think it's the number one when you're doing a redesign, and the term that we use is called, I use idealized design, right? You're creating the system of the future that you're implementing today. Very important to take that approach. But I think the most important piece for us was making sure that we kept it simple and it
Hmm.
was operational and implementable, right? And not to complicate it. And that was really important for our practice because we were a
Hmm.
small private practice.
Hmm.
And that was the approach we really needed to take. And I think that was very effective. And most importantly, within our office, a great example is we got our staff, like our billers, our managers, our medical assistants, we got them headsets with the new telecommunication system, where with the previous system, they had to hold the phone to their ear. And that was a big satisfier internally, not only for the staff, but for the patients, because then
Mhm.
they weren't hearing all that background, and they had a more private, confidential conversation with our staff member on the other end of the
Okay.
phone, and that was a big takeaway for us.
So simple, usable, these are the terms that you used. So how did you know that you reached that level as opposed to confusing, complicated? How did you know you got there?
So direct feedback from customers. We had performed a survey when we were going through the telecom redesign, and we started looking at our Google postings, our Google reviews, and
Hmm.
many of them were very negative,
Hmm.
that patients couldn't reach us. So we really focused on asking our customers how things were going, have things improved, and most importantly, we implemented a customer service recovery system
Hmm.
where if we had a poor rating review, or someone verbally, in person or on the phone, had a poor experience, I would actually call them directly myself. And then we would get our manager, the business manager or the clinical manager involved to make sure that we were addressing their concerns immediately, right? And not letting those concerns or issues, go by the wayside where the patient or the family member felt like they weren't being heard. But that was really critical to provide that customer service.
Okay.
And that was kind of like the icing on the cake for the system that we implemented.
Was this system, was it documented?
Yes, it was. And
Okay.
we had a whole process where basically we would receive either a poor rating or a communication from a patient or family member. It would come to me. I would reach out to them literally directly, call them on the phone, and then we would hand it off to the manager, one of the managers, and that was all documented.
So and
And
the documentation said negative call comes in, first step is John. John
correct,
contacts them. Okay, so so
correct,
you took the steps, you kind of mapped out the steps of what you want it to be, you mapped it out and you wrote it all down.
exactly. And the
Got it.
most important piece of that is when the COO or the practice manager calls the patient or family member, that shows a level of awareness, a level of like, we're here to help you, to listen to you, which a lot of patients or customers don't always get.
Hmm.
And I felt like that was really a differentiator for our business. So they knew that, we were taking it at a very high level.
Hmm.
And I think that was very effective.
Yeah. One of the things I've heard about systems is when you're documenting it, how do you know it's good at the right level or too highfalutin or not? And what I heard, what I've been told is, and what I use when I do this in my own business is, as best I can tell, if I pulled somebody off the street who, is reasonably intelligent, but doesn't know anything about my business, and I showed it to them, I said, please read this and see if you can follow it, see if it makes sense. And if they were to say, yeah, I think I could follow this if I had to do it, victory. Have you ever heard anything like that? Or like, how, because my God, you could document, you can go overboard, you can go underboard, you want the kind of just right, you know, how do you know?
So I think, again, you have to have qualitative, and if you want to get qualitative and quantitative, metrics that you
I
on a
just mean
regular
like
basis.
the level of documentation, just like you could take a process and you could write 12 pages about it
Yeah,
or one,
right.
like, so how do you, what kind of tests do you use when you're documenting it?
Um, well, I think the most important thing is, with your employees, with your team, is communications, and when you have your daily huddles or your weekly meetings,
I just mean
your
when you're
discussion.
documenting the process, just when you're
Oh, when you're
first writing. Yeah, just when you're
okay.
when you're writing it down for the first time. That's what I'm zeroing in on.
Okay, so you're saying, like, what is the process I use to document, or how do I
No, like
document it?
how, so
Yeah,
now you've documented it. You've
yeah,
documented this uh patient, retention process, let's call it, what we've been
yeah.
talking about. And write down, all right, step one, negative call comes in, goes to John. Step two, da, 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 if this, then that. And this is how we're going to do this. This is our system for handling, negative customer calls. You've decided that you need to document that, you need to systematize it. So now you've documented it. What's the standard that you use, you guys, that you work with clients on and that you did at the time to say, and when we document this, this is how we're going to know that once we're done documenting it, it's documented well.
Yeah. So I think, for this specific business, again, having a process where, the specific stakeholders like myself, the other managers are involved. And, you know, again, reviewing these, solutions or these experiences with patients, and, making sure that we're continually, evolving and improving on I call it lessons learned, right? So we have these lessons learned, you document it, you write it down, and you don't just file it in a filing cabinet. You're continually improving your processes and systems. And I think that's a very valuable, approach that we took, where you want to just keep, redesigning and relearning. And the most important thing within an organization, which I call it's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement, and that's a process that I use. Is
Okay.
again making sure that everybody in the team is aware that we have the desire, the knowledge, and we continually want to reinforce the improvements or the lessons learned that we've put in place.
Okay. Okay. You even hit the next question I was going to ask you, so I'm going to jump to the kind of the finish line. Is there anything you think we should have covered that we didn't touch on?
I think one thing that is always critical in any of business operating systems is the people, and making sure that we're connecting the people in the office, our stakeholders in the community, and keeping them engaged. That's really important.
Okay.
And I think that's something that I've been very successful at throughout my career. And I think that's been something that has absolutely helped other organizations as well.
Okay. Okay. The other question is, the context is we've caught a listener's attention. They're like, yeah, I need to start building systems. We need to start building systems. It's too chaotic around here, whatever their rationale is, but they don't know where to get started. So if you had to give them something super simple, like quick and easy, just to get them off the starting line and get moving down the path um, of getting started, what would you recommend they do?
The first thing is what I call go to the crowds. Is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You
Mhm.
can model other businesses and other best practices, but you have to design what's going to work for your business or
Mhm.
your physician practice,
Mhm.
and then engage your staff, because if you ask them, they will give you solutions and also improvement ideas that are could be extremely valuable to your company and your business, and you can implement those solutions instead of spending weeks or months trying to figure out what's working and what's not working. If you actually engage your staff and you ask them, they will tell you. And that includes your stakeholders, your patients, your family members, your business to business clients. That's a really important step that often gets not the full attention that it should get before we
Yeah.
implement different solutions. Very critical.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
You're
Uh,
welcome.
very good. Appreciate you coming on
Yeah, this is
Practice Care
fun.
and shedding some light on this. Really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Carl. I really appreciate this. And it was great having a great conversation with you. And yeah, thanks for all the great questions. Very, very,
Absolutely.
very valuable. So
Thank,
hopefully our audience will get some great lessons learned from this and be able to apply some of these practices to their businesses.
let's hope so. Thank you again. And a couple of quick points before we depart. First, if you are a private practice owner or you're like John and I and you serve private practice owners, either way, you've got some experience or expertise on the business side of private practice. We want you to come on Practice Care and talk about what you know. Don't overthink that. Don't undervalue something you think is, you've figured out. I promise you something you think is boring, others are struggling with. So in the show notes of every episode, including John's, there's a link, a couple of clicks. Tell us what's on your mind and we'll get you scheduled as soon as we can. And finally, please subscribe to Practice Care. It's one word. We're everywhere, easy to find. Every player's got us. We drop a new episode every week, and this is the easiest way, subscribing to stay up to date. Thanks very much, and until next time.